Hi, I'm Kyle Yoder. I'm the Associate Research Director at CEIR, the Center for Election Innovation and Research. I'm very pleased to be talking today about how Kansas elections are run and how voters can be certain that they are secure, transparent, and accessible. Let me talk to you a little bit about what I'm going to say, and then we'll dive in. Roadmap for today's presentation. I'm going to start by telling you who runs Kansas elections, what voters need to know to cast their vote, what voters need to know to trust that their vote was counted as they intended, and then share several resources to learn more. So let's dive right into things. Who runs elections in the state of Kansas? At the state level, that's the Secretary of State, but each locality has their local elections administered and run by the county clerk and the local election commissioner. Just to give you a sense of what that landscape looks like in the state of Kansas, those of you already in the state are likely familiar with this, that there are 105 counties in the state of Kansas. Most of those counties have a county clerk, and that's who voters should go to with any questions about how to vote in their jurisdiction. Voters in 4 counties that you see here on screen have an election commissioner. Voters should instead go to that office with any questions about voting in their community. Anyone in the state of Kansas who's interested in knowing who they should go to and how to get their questions answered can do so here at the link that you see at the bottom of the screen. Highly recommend that everyone talk to their local election official. So let's answer some of those questions if we can for voters about what they need to know to cast their vote in the state of Kansas. In 2026, we have 2 major federal elections coming up. That's what we're going to be focused on today. The primary election in August, on August 4th, and the general election on November 3rd. For that primary election on August 4th, the deadline to request your mail ballot as a voter in Kansas is July 28th. Kansas also has an early voting option, early in person. That's available in the primary election from July 28th to August 3rd, although that start date can vary slightly by county, as we'll get into. So voters should, again, check in with their local elections office to answer any questions that they might have about dates for voting in their jurisdiction. The general election, November 3rd, those dates have been here on screen. The deadline to request a mail ballot, October 27th, and early in-person voting is available between October 27th and November 2nd. Let's talk very quickly about who's going to be on the ballot for each of these elections. So this slide shows races that are going to be on both ballots. Several federal offices, including races for U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, several state offices, governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, treasurer, and state board of education. Various other state and local races, as well as some ballot questions may appear on either of these ballots for voters in Kansas. Specifically for the primary election, Kansas voters will see 1 ballot question, and there will be a separate ballot question on the ballot in the general election, as well as a few other races that will only appear on the general election ballot. You can see all that information on the screen in front of you. Let's talk about voter registration in the state of Kansas and what voters need to do in order to make sure that they're ready to cast a ballot in either the primary or the general this fall. The last day to register in person or online in the state of Kansas before the primary is July 14th. Before the general is October 13th. This registration must be received by the election office. So either you go in person or you go online and submit that registration by those dates. There's also separately a deadline to register by mail. It's the same date, but for registrations by mail, it's a postmark deadline. So Kansas voters who are seeking to register before the August primary must drop their registration in the mail, have it postmarked by July 14th, or postmarked by October 13th for the general. Again, online voter registration is available in Kansas that for the vast majority of voters will be their most convenient option, but options to register in person or by mail do exist for voters who want to take advantage of that. Regardless of what camp you're in, voters in the state of Kansas can use the link at the bottom of the screen to check their registration, make sure that all their information is up to date, or if they're not already registered or want to update any information in their registration, again, they can use the link at the bottom of the screen to do so. I want to talk briefly about what voter registration looks like in the context of the rest of the country. So this is a map from our recent report on the expansion of innovative voter registration methods across the 50 states and Washington, D.C. And as you can see on this map, we've colored Kansas yellow. They have online voter registration. That's available to all voters. That can be accessed at the link I just provided on the previous slide. Other states also have same-day registration options and automatic voter registration options to provide additional opportunities for voters to get registered either immediately before casting a ballot during early in person or on election day, or passively as they're interacting with their motor vehicles agency or other government offices, updating their information there so that can be captured and collected and sent to the election office to keep their voter registration up to date. Unfortunately, in Kansas, those options aren't available, but fortunately for voters in Kansas, they do have the option of online voter registration. And so all Kansas voters should take advantage of this option just to make sure that their information is accurate, is up to date, and to correct their registration or update their registration as necessary, as needed for the deadlines that I just talked about. If you're interested in knowing more about this picture of online voter registration methods and various options to register to vote, you can access the full report at the link on screen. You can also see the maps as part of that report going back every federal election until 2000. So every 2 years from 2000 to 2026, we've created these maps and we show the evolution of the availability, the expansion of the availability of these options over time. Highly encourage you to check that out if you're interested. One last note about party registration, about voter registration, specifically party registration here in the state of Kansas before we move on. Primary elections, including this one in August, are what we call closed elections. Voters must be affiliated with a particular political party in order to cast a ballot in that party's primary. However, if a voter is unaffiliated or independent right now, not to worry, they have the option to become affiliated with that party and cast a ballot in the primary for the party that they want to. So Kansas voters all had the option to register with the political party when they registered to vote. At the primary, unaffiliated voters must register with the party in order to vote for that partisan primary. They can do so at the polls when they go to vote. Voters who are already affiliated with one party, if they wanted to change their party affiliation, they had until June 1st to do so. So that deadline has passed. But if they don't want to vote in that partisan primary, or if an unaffiliated voter wants to remain unaffiliated, they still can vote in the primary election on August 4th. All eligible voters can vote on nonpartisan offices or ballot questions, including the one that will only appear on the August 4th primary. That's the constitutional amendment question that we covered earlier. Let's move on to voting before election day. So this is from another one of CEIR's reports. This one is tracking the expansion of voting before election day. Again, this is another report where we've created a map for every federal election going back to the year 2000 to show the availability of options to cast a ballot before election day available in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. As you can see on this map, Kansas is green, meaning that Kansas voters have an option to vote not only in person on election day, but also in person during early voting and by mail. This is available to all voters without a reason, without an excuse. And Kansas is one of more than 30 states that offers all of these options to voters. Voters can take advantage of whichever option is most convenient for them. Let's start by talking about the option to vote by mail in the state of Kansas. So mail voting is available to all Kansas voters, no excuse required, no reason needed to specify. To advance vote by mail, voters must submit an advance application that can be submitted by mail, email, fax, or in person. So in order to receive a mail ballot, you have to apply for that mail ballot here in Kansas. When you apply for that mail ballot, voters must provide a copy of their driver's license or ID number, or provide a photocopy of that ID. And voters with a permanent disability or illness do have the option as part of that application to join a permanent absentee voting list. Folks on that list don't have to submit an application time and time again for every election. They will automatically receive a ballot in the mail if they are appearing on that list. The deadline to apply for that ballot or to apply to join the permanent absentee list for the primary election is July 28th. For the general election is October 27th. I'll note we do not recommend applying for a mail ballot that close to those election dates, just because USPS may encounter delays, something may happen. You also may want to take some time with your ballot. Highly encourage folks who want to vote by mail to request their ballot earlier. and to submit it back to their office if they're returning it by mail, to do so no less than a week before the election that they are planning to vote in. Another reason for that advice, particularly now in this election, in Kansas, ballots must be received by the close of polls on election day in the county election office authorized drop box or polling place. Meaning your ballot, in order to be counted, must be in the possession of the election office by the close of polls on election day in order to be counted in that election. This is new this election, part of SB 4, which passed the end of 2025, making it effective January 1st, 2026, that mail ballots must be received by the close of polls on election day to be counted. Previously in the state of Kansas, mail ballots could be received up to 3 days after election day and still be counted. This is commonly called a grace period. Kansas repealed its grace period, was the first state in the country to do so in a long time. And now, beginning with this primary election here in August and continuing for the foreseeable future, voters in Kansas must have their ballots back in the hands of election offices by the close of polls on election day in order for them to be counted. Let's talk about early in-person voting. This is available to all registered voters in the state of Kansas. For the primary election, it's available from July 28th until noon on August 3rd. The start date for early voting may vary a little bit by county. So some counties in Kansas begin early voting as early as July 15th. Voters should check with their local county office to discover that information for themselves in their area. For the general election, early voting begins October 27th statewide. In some counties, it may begin as early as October 14th. Again, voters should check with their local election office to find out more. And it will continue until noon on November 2nd. So for both the primary and the general, early voting continues until noon on the day before the election and begins several weeks before. That exact date may vary by county. Voters should reach out to their local elections office or access the link at the bottom of the screen in order to learn more about early voting in their area. One key thing to note, voters must present photo ID when they go to vote early in person. We'll talk about that in just a second because the same thing is true for voting on election day. Voting on election day is also an option for voters in Kansas. That election day for the primary is Tuesday, August 4th again, and the election day for the general is Tuesday, November 3rd. Voters in Kansas must cast their ballot on election day at their assigned precinct unless their county has vote centers. So voters should contact their local election office to confirm their polling location and hours in their state if that information is not readily available to them. And just like during early voting, voters in Kansas on election day must present photo ID. So let's talk about those acceptable forms of photo ID. That list is here on screen. And again, any voters with questions about what constitutes an acceptable ID should reach out to their local election official. One last thing to note about voting on election day is the hours. Election day polling places are open at the same time statewide. Kansas, as I'm sure many viewers know, has 2 time zones. Counties on Central Time, polling places are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Counties on Mountain Time, polls are open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Some counties may extend these polling hours. You should, again, if you're interested in knowing more, check with your local election offices. But regardless of where you are in the state, voters in line by the time that polls close will be able to cast a ballot. So voters should feel confident knowing that as long as they're in line by the time that polls close on election day, they will be able to cast their ballot and have it counted in that election. So let's talk about what voters need to know to trust the count. Trust that their ballot will be counted as they intend in the election in Kansas this fall. All voters in Kansas must sign a legally binding statement that swears their eligibility to vote. This includes attesting to their citizenship when registering. This is true of every state in the country where voter registration is required, and it remains true in Kansas. In addition to that attestation, year-round, 365 days a year, election officials are checking records regularly for eligibility and removing any ineligible voters. This is a process commonly referred to as list maintenance. It is prescribed in federal law. All states are doing this. All election officials are doing this. across the country being very vigilant about keeping their voter records up to date and making sure that everything is accurate and running smoothly. In addition to all of this, election officials are checking voters' identity when they vote. As we said before, voters need to provide proof of identity when they're casting their ballot, either by providing an ID in person or during early voting, or as a photocopy or number accompanying their mail ballot. And then audits are happening after each election to double check the counts to make sure that everything was counted correctly and just confirm what we know, which is that election officials are doing a good job of remaining thorough, accurate. Speaking of audits, key to those audits is being able to look at paper ballots and making sure that there's a physical paper record of every vote that is cast. And fortunately, all Kansas votes will be cast on paper in the 2026 election. This has been true for many years in Kansas, and the same is true of 98% of votes nationally. The one exception is the state of Louisiana, which is currently working towards replacing its voting machines and moving towards paper ballots. Different counties in the state of Kansas do use different machines, so you'll hear people talk about hand-marked paper ballots, ballot marking devices, hybrid tabulators, but across the state, all of these machines are in accordance with state law, and all are producing a paper ballot record for checks, recounts, and audits. For more, interested voters can go to our peer organization, or interested viewers can go to our peer organization, verifiedvoting.org, where they have put together this really nifty resource called Verifier that looks at every jurisdiction in the country, not just Kansas, and it tracks and analyzes the voting machines available to voters in use in every jurisdiction. Highly recommend checking them out. They do a lot of great work over there. In addition to all of this, Kansas election officials are able to begin pre-processing mail ballots, which gives them an opportunity to get a head start on confirming the identity of voters casting their ballots by mail, and make sure that the count can continue to happen speedily, accurately, and thoroughly, regardless of when those mail ballots are coming in. So election officials verify voter identity for every mail ballot as soon as it comes in. Election officials begin verifying that voter identity as soon as they receive the ballot, and then ballot scanning can commence at a time that's set by the election board, which may be before election day, but even if that's the case, no results are released, everything is kept under lock until no actual counting happens until election day itself. If during any of this pre-processing, officials need more information from a voter to confirm their identity, they will reach out to the voter to get that information. This is a process called ballot cure, and it gives voters the opportunity to make sure that a simple clerical error or mistake doesn't impact their right to vote. That if they cast their vote via mail and election officials doing their due diligence need a little bit more information, that there's a way for them to get in touch and make sure that voters have the opportunity to correct that information. The last thing I want to talk about is the time to count the votes, because counting votes does take time, especially when you have as many races on the ballot as we saw earlier in this presentation. Local boards in Kansas have up to 13 days after election day to canvass and certify official results for a reason. They're doing all of those thorough checks we've been talking about: ballot cure, ballot adjudication, reconciliation of tallies, and any other routine checks and processes that are needed to make sure that the counts are correct and accurate. Recounts can take place after that official canvass at the local level, and then the state will certify official statewide results after all counties are reported. So getting an official result from the primary, from the general, may take a little bit of time. That is evidence of thoroughness, evidence of accuracy, evidence of election officials doing the good work to keep our elections secure and accurate for this election and for future generations. If you're interested in learning more about any of the processes that are happening after we cast our ballots during early voting or on election day, you can check out CEIR's report, linked at the bottom of the screen, What Happens After We Vote, where we've got this nifty process map and explainers on all of these different processes in detail so that you and any voters who are interested in the state of Kansas can more fully understand everything that's going into counting their ballot and making sure it's counted as intended. The last thing I will name, for anyone with any additional qualms or concerns or just interest in learning more about elections in Kansas, is that they should be a poll worker. Being a poll worker is a great way, probably the best way, to learn firsthand how the process of voting, how the process of elections works in your community. It's also an opportunity for you to give back, to support your community and American democracy, And election officials are always recruiting poll workers. So in Kansas, voters can go to this link to sign up, learn more, and participate in the democratic process firsthand, gaining that firsthand experience at the front lines of democracy in a really meaningful way. The last thing I will leave you with is just several resources here, official resources from the state of Kansas, just providing information on everything that we've talked about today during this presentation, as well as information that CEIR provides on our website. You can find all of these resources on every topic that we've covered and a lot more at electioninnovation.org/research. Highly encourage everybody to take a look, learn more about election administration, and continue to learn more about how our democracy works. Thank you so much for joining, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, comments, or concerns.